Hello, everybody. You're reading with Jimmy. We're going to analyze Guy de Maupassant's The Matter with André, which I hope you read, because it's an excellent story, and we're going to analyze it now. So hold on to your seats. This is a story. I want you to read this box first. This is a story about morality, behavior, and motivations, MBM. Morality, behavior, and motivations. And I hope you read the story with me before this analysis, although you don't have to, but it'll make a lot more sense. And it's a story about positive and negative reinforcements. We're going to talk about that as well at the end of the analysis. And the analysis is going to deal with these topics, but it's also going to deal with the topic of child abuse, because child abuse is used in this story. It's part of the plot. What is the plot? Well, it's about a woman who cheats on her husband with a guy who tortures her son, and then the husband comes home and uncovers he was pinching him, uncovers it, and then blames the nurse, and she gets fired. That's the summary of the plot. This is a third-person narrator telling us this. So it's very important to understand the third-person narrator, as we've discussed many times, is outside the story. So if we're going to understand the story, we have to believe what the third-person narrator says. And in this case, the third-person narrator is interesting because this is a translation from the French. So we have to thank Mr. Collette for translating it properly. I've been around this story a long time. And before we proceed, I want to read a quote from Matthew. Matthew is a gospel, of course. Whoever shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever shall receive one such child in my name receives me. But whoever shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it would have been better for him that a millstone was hanged from his neck and that he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Child abuse is immoral. There's no question about it. These children are young, they're innocent, they have no concept of reality. And there's lots of forms of child abuse, not just the ones we see in this story. You can abuse a child by teaching the child the wrong things, which we can talk about some other time. But anyway, it's used in this story to illustrate not only its own immorality, but the consequences of decisions of morality that lead to it. It's a complex story. Even though it's a short story, it's very complex, and I want part of the analysis to help you understand the motivations of the story. And yet, it's actually told with some humor at the expense of the child, of course. There are some definitely funny parts in here. I know, it seems weird if you're going to talk about child abuse. How can you have humor, Jimmy? Well, it's interesting. You have to be able to, first of all, laugh at yourself. And certainly child abuse is nothing to laugh at. And I'm not suggesting it's funny. But this is a third-person narrator describing the events that happen here as a result of immorality. And nobody likes to talk about morality these days, but we're going to talk about it because there is such a thing as good and evil. Now, if you don't believe that, maybe you don't want to listen to this analysis. So just shut Jimmy off and go on your merry way. But what we want to do in this analysis, really, is understand morality. The captain in the story abused the child and surely will end up with a millstone around his neck. At least let's hope so. But what I really want to explore is what drives these people to do what they do. We study great literature to understand how other people lead their lives in order to understand our own, how to lead our own. You've heard me say that before. But in this case, what I want to do is understand what's driving these people. Remember, Albert Camus said, it's not important that the argument be right or wrong. It's important for it to make you think. Remember that? So stories are here to make you think. Regardless of what you think by the end of the story, was the captain a bad guy? Absolutely. But I want you to try to understand the story in the context of the story. Okay? All right. So let's go down a little bit here. this sets up this box here. This sets up the scene. This tells us who the characters are, where they're at, what's going on. And it's important to understand the words of what the captain and the Moreau's wife, Matilda, are really up to here. So she feels isolated, misunderstood, neglected. He implores her. He's been pressing her hard. He's been paying attention to her. And so this is a third person narration. I don't know why it says three. Let me check that out. Third, Third, third person narration. I don't want you to judge this story's characters by your own morality, whatever that is, but I want you to go into the story to understand their behavior, their doubts about what they're doing. There's one character in here who has no doubts about what he's doing, and that's the captain. He has one goal in mind, as you can see if you read the story. And we're going to talk about that. Up until now, this first page is months of platonic love. Plato's in there. You can look it up. But it's basically friendship that is intimate but not sexual. Platonic. They called it platonic, and look it up, study it if you'd like. But it's not it's non-sexual love. It's intimate, it's closeness, but it's not sexual. So they define platonic love here, squeezed hands, brief kisses. That's what the captain's doing, platonic love. But then he makes an ultimatum. He declares that he will leave town right away and apply for a different posting unless she gives him a rendezvous, a real rendezvous. What's a rendezvous? It's a meeting to agree at a place and time between two people. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is an ultimatum. He's giving her, Matilda, and we don't know her name yet, but we will, an ultimatum. You either, give me a real rendezvous, whatever that means. He's using the adjective. Remember, we always studied parts of speech when we read? A real rendezvous, not just a rendezvous, but a real rendezvous. What do you think he means by that? Do you think Matilda understands what he means by real rendezvous? Or do you think she's unaware of that and she doesn't know? She's just pretty happy, right? Doing what she's doing because she's very misunderstood. She's isolated. Her husband just works too much. And so he's really telling her he wants the real thing. He wants to change this platonic relationship into something more, something physical. And he works on her, and she has given away, she promised the meeting. That sets up the scene for the entire story. So, some questions to ask yourself if this is a story about motivations and behavior and morality. Is the captain's love platonic? It's a complex question. The evidence in the story suggests that it is for a while, but it's not. And if you study literature, a lot of times platonic love starts out that way, but if you're very careful, you can see the clues that it's not platonic. How do I know? Here, squeezed hands, right? Squeezed hands. That's not platonic. The minute you start touching people, the minute you touch people, it breaches the wall of platonic love. Brief kisses. That's not platonic love. Stolen kisses. You see? This is the third person narrator telling us indirectly what the captain's true motivation is. What's the captain's true motivation? Is to really he wants to really have a relationship with this woman in a sexual way. That's what he wants to do. It's very clear here, right? In fact, it's so clear he gives her the ultimatum. You're either going to give me a real rendezvous or I'm leaving. And she succumbs to the ultimatum. What are Mrs. Moreau's motivations? Why does she give in? We talked in many, many, many stories we read about loneliness being a great motivator, right? She's lonely. She's misunderstood. She feels isolated. Her husband always works. Now, we don't know yet, right here on this first page, we do not know that there's a fourth character. We don't know that she has a son named André until you start reading the story, right? So now that you know, if you read the story, when you're analyzing and you go back, remember what we want to do is read the story first and then go back and pay attention to the words that are used, because those words give a deeper, deeper, deeper meaning to what the motivation and morality is here. She has a son. She has a son, but she still feels isolated, misunderstood, right, etc. So that Mrs. Moreau's motivations are just that. Now, do you use ultimatums in a serious relationship? If you have a serious relationship with someone, do you use ultimatums? You either do this or I'm not going to do that. You either do that or I'm not going to do this. That's a personal question. Jimmy can answer that from his youth because he heard a lot of ultimatums. That's another story. But and again, what is the real rendezvous from a fake one? Is there such a thing? What is the narrator implying with the adjective real? We talked about that. So that sets it up, and suddenly she goes to the wall of the garden, which was in the first paragraph. She's waiting for him, and suddenly, what? She hears somebody climbing over the wall, and she nearly runs away. You see, she nearly ran away. She didn't run away, but she almost did. Why? What if it's not the captain? What's up? She gets nervous. Why? Because she's about to give him a real rendezvous. Let's continue the analysis. Yeah, can we continue the analysis? Okay. He says, Matilda, here's where we learn. She's, her resisting and feelings of shame are important to understanding her character. Read this up here. She obviously wants a platonic relationship. Then why does she agree to meet him? It is clear what the captain wants. We talked about this. And remember this, what does this mean? They have nothing to fear. We're going to read this now. So they meet. It was him. They exchange a kiss. He said, my darling, my love, my sweet, my angel. It starts to rain. Here comes the rain, right? Rain has different meanings in different books. It's since it's raining now, they can't stay in the garden for the real rendezvous. He was going to stay in the garden for the real rendezvous, but it's raining. The plot develops, see? And he says, she gave a start. It's raining on her neck now. Matilda, my darling, my love, let's go inside. It's midnight. We have nothing to fear. We have nothing to fear. What does that mean? They have nothing to fear. What are they afraid of? The husband's gone, right? We find you'll find out that the servant's room, the nurse is there, right? But we have nothing to fear. Let's go inside. No, dearest, I'm frightened. Who knows what might happen? So she's scared. She's scared. But he held her tight. And listen to this, all right? I didn't mark this for a reason. Your servants' rooms are on the third floor, overlooking the square. Your room is on the first floor, looking onto the garden. How does he know that, ladies and gentlemen? How does the captain know that? He's obviously been, reconnoitering her, right? He's been checking it out. Nobody will hear us. Nobody will hear us. Well, that turns out to be wrong, because we're going to find out that André, if you read the book, right? If you read the story, nobody will hear us, and I want to love you freely and completely. He embraced her passionately, covering her face with kisses. She still resisted him, ladies and gentlemen. And even ashamed. This is very important in the study of morality. You can't, if you have morality, depends on the morality you have, but if you have a conscience and you know what's right and you know what's wrong, you can feel shame. If you don't, you cannot feel shame. This is very important. This woman feels ashamed. She even feels ashamed. Why is she ashamed? Because she's about to have a relationship, a physical, sexual relationship with someone that's not her husband. And in those days, these days, maybe not anymore, you married for better or worse, right? You're not supposed to cheat on your husband, on your wife. You're not supposed to do that. And I'm not talking about today's morality. We're talking about the book, the story's morality. In those days, it was different. So put yourself in the story. But he puts his arm around her, sweeps her up, and he goes in. He takes her in there. He takes her in there, bolts the door. And she bolts the door because she doesn't want anybody coming in, right? And she fell fainting. He kneels down, and he's undressing her. He's undressing her. She's not undressing herself. No, Anthony, please let me keep my virtue. What's virtue? You should look up that word, virtue. What is virtue? What does it mean when you lose your virtue? What is virtue? Can you lose your virtue? Does anyone have virtue? Can you see virtue? Think about that. I would hate you for it afterwards. What's it? For losing her virtue, right? Because what? It is so crude and ugly. What's so crude and ugly? It, losing her virtue, is so crude and ugly. And then she says, why can't we love each other just with our souls? That's platonic love. Platonic love is loving with your soul. It's the same thing you may feel towards a higher power, platonic love. You've never touched the higher power. You never touched beauty, but yet you may have a platonic love with beauty. You may have a platonic love with great thoughts. Who knows? But it's something that's done without physicalness. Not that there's anything wrong with physicalness, but in this case, she's asking him and telling him, I'd hate you for it. I would hate you. And then the third person narrator says, with the skill of a chambermaid and the urgency of a man in a hurry, he's in a hurry now. He takes off all her clothes. Now look at what he does. And in those days, this is not just a T-shirt. We're not talking just a T-shirt. Buttons, knots, hooks, laces. Think about what type of dress this lady's wearing, right? And so when she stood up, she's naked as if taking her hand out of a muff. And so she's in a panic now. She's naked. She runs behind the curtains in the bed, which is a dangerous refuge. And he follows her. But in his haste, he took off his sword too quickly, and it fell on the floor with a crash, and enters the fourth character. That crash of his sword wakes up the kid, wakes up André. And she goes, you've woken up André. He won't be able to sleep again. Her son was 50 months old. Here's your question. Since the captain scoped out that, where she lived so well, did he know that she had a son? Well, I don't know if there's enough evidence to prove it one way or the other. We can speculate if you'd like, but I don't know if we can prove it. My guess is that he did. But even if you say he didn't, it doesn't matter. Because this André, this kid, this 15-month-old kid, right, is going to be an obstacle to achieving his end. Remember, we're dealing with morality, behavior, right? Those are what we're talking about. So the captain wasn't even listening, right? The kid's crying. He's not listening. What does it matter? I don't care. I love you. But she pushed him away. This is very important. This is more important than you realize. She pushed him away. Now suddenly she's in charge. She pushes him away, frightened and upset. No. Listen to him crying. He'll wake up the nurse. And what would we do if she came down? Now she's worried about getting caught. You woke up my son. He'll keep crying. What if the nurse comes? We'd be done for. Listen, when he cries like that, the only way to do anything about it is to bring him into the bed. With my husband brings him in here and he calms down. Let me go get him. So she uses her son to stop his advances. But is it because she doesn't want the physical relationship? Well, we can speculate. But right now she's saying, no, this is not good. The nurse will come down, we'll get caught, So she probably wants to participate in this relationship. But yet her son is crying. Her son is crying. So she brings him in. He's howling away. He comes in. The captain got up in consternation, and she rushed to the next room to get him. And he sits aside this chair and starts rolling a cigarette, because obviously that's it. The kid stops crying. In the next page, I'll take him back, she says, takes him back. And mad with love, he clasped her in his arms. They're going to try it again. And she goes, Anthony, my love, oh, if you only knew how, what is she going to say? I don't know. But André starts crying again. The captain flew into a rage. Hell and damnation, won't the little beast. Here, look at this, little beast. It's not a beast, it's a child. If you look at a child as a beast, and if you've had children and they start crying, they sound like beasts, right? They don't know, they're just crying. They need something, they need love, they affection, food, whatever, sleep. Won't the little beast shut up? Look at these words right here. No, the little beast wouldn't. That's the third person narrator. Remember I told you there's a little humor in here? That's a piece of humor. The little beast wouldn't shut up. The narrator is calling the child a little beast because the captain called him a little beast. And the narrator is enjoying telling us this story. He says the little beast. He was bellowing at the top of his voice. So she thought she could hear somebody moving upstairs. It could be the nurse. So 3 times she goes to get André, bring him back. He shuts up, takes him back 3 times. Captain left the house an hour before dawn, swearing like a trooper. Obviously, nothing happened. Nothing happened, right? To calm his impatience, Matilda promised to let him come back that evening. Okay, here we go again. Morality, decisions, behavior. To calm his impatience. He's impatient. He wants her. Does she want him? I think she does. I don't know if she does, but it sounds like she does. She's going to calm him down. You can come back the next night. So he comes back the next night, and this paragraph, you can read it on your own again, is very, very interesting. He's he's so careful. He's so careful. And he's so close to achieving happiness, but then a piece of furniture suddenly snaps. And that wakes up André. And soon he's yelping like a fox. The mother rushed to get him, bring him into their own bed, and the captain was now fuming with anger. This time, he doesn't get out of the bed. This next paragraph is one of the most best written paragraphs about torture I've ever read. You can literally feel what's going on. And I'm going to take the time to read it again. Very gently, he stretched out his hand, took a small piece of the child's flesh on his thighs or his buttocks between 2 fingers and pinched it. The child struggled and uttered deafening screams, and then the captain, losing patience, pinched him harder all over his body. Gripping a fold of flesh, he squeezed it hard, twisted it. Then he let it go to take another fold next to it, and then another further on, and then yet another, and the child screamed like a pig. You've ever been pinched? I'm just telling you, I used to read this to sophomores in high school when Jimmy was a teacher, and you could literally stop traffic. Children who were underachievers were paying it. You can feel, if you've ever been pinched, or, I'm just saying, this is torture. This is where the child abuse comes in. Now, why is he doing this? You know why he's doing this. Because he wants to have sex with, Matilda. That's what he wants to do. And he will stop at nothing. So morality is when you stop, he's really not a moral man, this guy. He's torturing the son. Now, does she see this? These are questions you have to ask yourself. Does she allow it to go on, or does she not know what this guy's doing? Remember, this is the old days. There's no electric lights. There may or may not be a candle on it. Who knows? But it's dark. It's dark. I don't think she knows what this guy's doing. All she knows is that the kid is crying. But anyway, she takes him back, right? Stifle his cries, and then everything is fine. He gets his way, right? And then the next night, he came again, and the kid starts crying again. And at the bottom of the page, you can see he pinched him so hard, violently, that the child nearly choked, rolling his eyes and foaming at the mouth. Horrible. That's horrible. To do that to a child, to do that to an adult. That's horrible. Horrible. And for what? For what? To achieve his end of sexual pleasure. Okay, some people are like that, right? But that's morality speaks to us and makes us think about this. Are you willing to do whatever it takes to get what you want? I hope not. Right? Besides, when you read my little notes here, you don't need to have a movie. Your imagination with these words and this beautiful translation will make you feel what Andre's going through. The horror. The wife now has to lie. She cheats on her husband. The husband is oblivious to the situation. I'm not going to read that yet. But anyway, after 4 days, the child stopped crying to come to his mother's bed. He's been conditioned now not to cry, to come to the mother's bed. That's conditioning. That's reinforcement. We're going to talk about that. All right? That's the husband comes home, and you know the rest of the story if you read. The husband comes home. He wants to bring the kid to bed. The kid starts screaming. Oh, my God, this is horrible. What's going on here? He must be sleepy. Next morning, he sees the kid playing. He starts bringing him to the bed again, and the kid starts screaming again. Remember, because he's been conditioned not to go to the bed. He's been conditioned. He's been tortured. Tortured. And so the husband whips up the nightgown of the kid, and he sees all these blue spots, huge blue spots. First, he thinks it's leprosy, some kind of horrible disease. And then Matilda, this is important, deathly pale, staring on her own, suddenly gave a shrill. This is why I believe, Jimmy believes, that she didn't really know what this character was doing to her kid. And she calls him a wretch. She realizes now what this guy did. And her husband says, what do you mean? What wretch? What wretch? What wretch? And she goes, she stammered, she stuttered. And she blames the nurse. She blames the nurse. She must have been pinching him to stop him from crying. The notary nearly beat her. She denied everything, but she was fired, and her behavior was reported to the town council, and she found it impossible to find another city. In other words, the nurse was the scapegoat, the person who's blamed for the wrongdoings, mistakes, or faults of others. The nurse becomes the scapegoat. Whew. Ladies and gentlemen, what's this story? This story should make you think about motivations and behaviors. What do you do? How do you do it? One of the key words never mentioned in this story is commitment. Commitment. What is commitment? The captain was committed to achieving his goal at all costs. He had one goal in mind. He didn't let anything stand in the way. What were the wife's goals? Well, we could say at a superficial level, right, that she was just lonely, whatever, and she cheated on her husband, obviously, and had sexual pleasure. But at what cost? What cost? You should think about what it costs you when you compromise yourself. That's what this story is about. The story is about compromising your morality, your own behaviors to get what you want. How far are you willing to go? Where is the line you draw? Where's the line you draw when you're doing things? Right? Poor André got caught up in the middle of everything. Note his position in the bed between his mother and father. He is in the middle between the husband and the wife. There's a reason for that, right? Not just because he happens to come there, when the captain's there, but children do that. They come between husband and wife because once you have a child, your focus is on the child. It should be on the child, not the husband, not the wife, but the child, right? There's so many layers in this story. Now, you can Google some more if you'd like for some analysis, but I want to finish by just discussing a little bit about reinforcement. Because if you step back and look at this, and we understand morality, and you have your own morality, and we understand child abuse is horrible and understand that, I want to talk about reinforcement for a minute. There's positive and negative reinforcement. And studies have shown, not just my studies, Jimmy's studies, but psychological studies, all sorts of studies, that when you use positive reinforcement to change behavior and you are successful in changing the behavior, it lasts a lot longer. If you use negative reinforcement, you can change the behavior faster, but it'll go back to the other way very quickly. You can read this on your own. Reinforcement means you're increasing a behavior. Punishment means you're decreasing a behavior. Was the captain punishing the child? He was using torture. Of course he was. He was punishing the kid for crying. Shame on him. Shame on him for punishing a child for crying. That's what 15-month-old kids do. Adults cry. Do you pinch them when an adult cries? Shame on him. But he can't feel shame. The captain does not feel shame. The wife she starts out feeling shame, but then loses her feelings of shame until she realizes what the captain did to her kid. And even then, she doesn't have the courage to say what the truth was. She blames the nurse. The nurse gets canned, right, and can't get another job. The poor nurse, the scapegoat. Do you blame other people for what you did or didn't do? That's a personal question, Jimmy. You can't ask that. Okay, whatever. But you should. You have to think about these things. That's what great literature is about. It's about asking these profound questions about yourself. Reinforcing behavior is very important. I'm not going to tell you what school Jimmy went to, but in those days, corporal punishment was okay. Corporal punishment was okay. And I assure you, corporal punishment changed Jimmy's behavior quickly. He never forgot it. But that doesn't mean he didn't do it again once the threat of corporal punishment was gone. And we can get into personal stories later on. But corporal punishment, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's horrible. And especially you don't do it on a child. You don't. You just don't. Which, Anyway. Another thing I want you to think about, and you can look this up on your own, this is my final thought on the matter, is Pavlov experiment with dogs. Pavlov was a psychologist who actually, when you read about him, that's what the captain was using. He was using that. Pavlov observed dogs naturally salivated when presented with food, an unconditioned stimulus. You see this here, Pavlov, where I'm pointing? But through repeated pairings of a neutral stimulus like a bell, he was able to make the dog salivate even though there was no food. That's Pavlov. He's conditioning behavior. He's bringing two disparate things together, condition of behavior. So in this story, Andre's crying is a behavior. Pinching the kid is changing the behavior. It's a negative reinforcement for changing the behavior from crying in the cot to crying in the bed. He flipped it. That's what he did. That's what Pavlov did when he conditioned the bell. He rang the bell and the dog started salivating even though there was no food. Do you ever see a good pizza in front of you and your mouth starts watering? Imagine ringing a bell and your mouth starts watering uncontrollably, and there's no pizza. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jimmy. We've just analyzed the matter with André. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. Jimmy at readingwithjimmy.com. I hope you think about this story, and I hope you email me with your questions and your observations. Thanks so much for listening.